Hello, you're watching the Nouvel Esprit video series on the theology of the body. This video is dedicated to audience 66. We are your hosts. I am Jeremy Hossotter.
And I'm Guillermo Moreno.
So we're continuing where we left off with the previous audience concerning this discussion of Matthew 22 and Luke 12 concerning the dialogue between the Sadducees and Jesus about the afterlife and marriage. And so one of the phrases that Jesus has in his reply is that when they rise from the dead, they take neither husband or wife. And so the Sadducees, they believe that if there was to be a resurrection, then you would have this situation where men and women would have these marriages from earth, and you run into the problem of the same man or the same woman having multiple spouses now, which is against God's law. And Jesus replied by making a rather surprising statement, simply that there is no husband or wife in the afterlife. And this presents us with a key point about the theology of the body. And so what we can say then is that there is when we talk about the resurrection, we know that this is, of course, a regaining of a fullness of perfection that we've been missing as humans in this fallen state of original sin. But there's this perfection that's proper to us because we are made in the image and likeness of God. Now, if you're unfamiliar with some of the terminology, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels, and they're grouped together because they have a very similar narrative style, the stories, and their terminology. And St. John's Gospel, which is the fourth gospel, there's only four gospels. This one is very different. And so they biblical scholars classify Matthew, Mark, and Luke as the synoptic gospels to kind of distinguish them from kind of the oddball of John's gospel. So this resurrection from the dead, we have neither husband or wife, has to be interpreted within, of course, as a key understanding of theology of the body and as part of the fulfillment of our status as made in the image and likeness of God. And so this statement of being neither wife or husband tells us that marriage and procreation belong strictly to this world, to earth. It is not part of our eschatological future. Now, eschatological, this word is a theological term. Eschatology is the study of the last things. It's the theology of heaven, hell, purgatory, death, resurrection. And so coming back then, this marriage and procreation do not belong to the resurrection, because in the resurrection, these lose their reason for existence. So this indicates then that the other world, that is heaven, is going to be the definitive fulfillment of the human race. Guillermo, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, to me, and I might be jumping the gun, this really begs the question. Considering the second to final point in the resurrection, these lose their reason for existence. What is their reason for existence. Now, and I don't think it's completely accurate to say that these marriage and procreation are a means to an end. I can't quite find other terminology to articulate what I'm trying to get across regarding that marriage and procreation. Are they ends in and of themselves? I think in a way, yes, but they point to something more, something else, maybe even something beyond.
Yeah, certainly. Especially when we start talking about marriage and procreation as a sign,
Mm-hmm.
which we have talked about many times before, kind of that covenantal sign
Mm-hmm.
of God and the community of persons that is the divine life, that relationship between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So there's certainly something there about marriage that it's not just a mere means for, say, propagating the human race or whatever, but there is a value in of itself that makes it a marriage, fatherhood, womanhood, or fatherhood and motherhood a end itself. On the other hand, it is something that is tied to earthly existence, and so the purpose of it is no longer going to be there
Precisely.
in heaven. One interesting point to make here is this is kind of a little bit of a controversial take that JP2 is taking on here, because there is a tradition within Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholicism where, yes, you have this, there's a sense of husband and wife even in heaven. And so there, I do know some people that would actually object to this statement that there's no husband or wife in heaven, which is something interesting. I'm not convinced by their arguments, but I haven't looked into their theology in depth to be able to say more about it. Are you still there, Guillermo?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You just went quiet, so I was curious.
You know, another point, and I think a controversial take as well. Yes, uh, marriage and procreation, they have their um, yeah, that's a vocation, and just that. Well, no, that's just kind of the best way I could phrase it right now. That and vocation, it's a way of life, of course, in this life, but when it comes to holy orders, that does transcend to the next one in a different way, a different topic, but the concept of vocation came to mind.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that.
Yep.
So, life through covenant. So, we need to know that the other world, that is heaven, is man's definitive and eternal fatherland. That is a father's house. And this new fatherland comes forth definitively through the resurrection. And so, with the resurrection, you have a recovery of bodiliness after we die. It's a reestablishment of integral human life. That is, our whole human life, our entire humanity as a whole is reestablished as a unified unity. And so, this resurrection is also a new state of human life. And the words concerning the resurrection in the Gospels, they contain this character of a promise, and the beginning, that is Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, are a point of reference for this character of promise. And also this recovery of our bodiliness and our, I guess we could say, our metaphysical integrity. Do you have any comments you'd like to add here, Guillermo?
I do not.
Okay. So the bodiliness of the resurrection, this statement of neither wife or husband affirms that the human body certainly has a role in the resurrection and that our masculinity and femininity are preserved. However, given that there, man and woman will not be husband and wife in the afterlife, this means that our existence as male and female will be different in heaven. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, we have this description of man leaving his family to join the unity with his wife and become one flesh. And this defined masculinity and femininity as conjugal and procreative. And so Christ's words about the resurrection indicates that masculinity and femininity will be newly constituted in the resurrection. And this leads us to this links us to another statement that Christ said that, quote, they are equal to angels. They are like the angels. And this speaks of a spiritualization of man according to the dimension of the other world that is heaven. And this spiritualization is distinct. It's different from our earthly life because, of course, this spiritualization entails the there's no marriage or procreation in heaven. And so the resurrection will also lead to a restoration of the truth of the human body, our being bodily, our bodiliness, that has been subjected to death in earthly life because of original sin. And so the statement, which we find in Luke's account of this dialogue between Christ and the Sadducees, is not to mean a disincarnation. That is to say that man and woman no longer become bodily, that man loses his bodiliness, but rather that there is a new degree of spiritualization occurring here about man because we become like the angels in heaven. And this points to a new submission of the body to the spirit. When we when Adam and Eve committed original sin, the body now no longer function in harmony and subordination to the soul. And so the body now rebelled against the soul. And we see this all the time, especially this statement of St. Paul, where the body has wants and things that it does in opposition to the spirit. And just this tension of conflict between body and soul is one of the fruits of concupiscence, a fruit of original sin. And this being equal to angels, then, that we read in St. Luke's account of this dialogue between the Sadducees and Christ, means that this tension is no longer there because the body now is submitting in a new, highly spiritualized manner to the soul. And so you have this reintegration going on. In heaven, man is reintegrated in a new spiritual way in communion with God and in communion with humanity. and in communion within self, namely the body subordinated to the soul. And in original sin, you have a disrupture at every single level. Man, man damaged his relationship with God. He damaged his relationship with fellow man, namely Adam and Eve damaged their relationships with each other, which we talked about with this concupiscent desire. And you had this harmony between body and soul, this damage in relationship metaphysically within man. And with the spiritualization in heaven, all of that is healed and elevated with a God's grace to a new level that's unprecedented that we will not fully see until we are in heaven. But we can catch some hints about what this is going to look like through biblical texts. And this is one of the texts that JP2 has brought to our attention, that we are going to be like the angels. So there's no marriage or procreation in heaven. Do you have anything else you'd like to add here, Guillermo?
I do not.
Okay. So one thing to note then is some technical points about human anthropology and the resurrection. JP2 references three thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, and St. Thomas Aquinas. And this is important metaphysical background when we want to talk about who is man and what is the resurrection. So Plato talks about how happiness requires freedom from the body, a liberation from matter. The body and soul are accidentally united, and death separates this. We are happy after death because now we're no longer we're freed, no longer chained to this body. For Aristotle, the body is called the matter, the material, the thing that the human is made of. And then you have the soul, which is the form that gives the whatness. So man is, we know what man is because of the soul, the form that informs us that this is a person with human nature. And we could infer that when we see the whole person. And you have the body, which is the material. And so for Aristotle, this is a unified whole, body and soul. It's not a accidental joining like how Plato understood it, but instead it is a unity, which Aristotle called a substance. Now, for St. Thomas, he goes on to use Aristotle's distinction between form and matter, but also he looks at the evidence of the New Testament to understand that the soul is united to the body for the soul's greater good, which is a remarkable point that you do not get in Plato, certainly, and also Aristotle, that the soul is united to the body for the soul's greater good. And so the resurrection gives us new data points about human anthropology in that it informs us that the body and soul together constitute the unity and the integrity of the human being, that it affirms a eschatological perfection of man as a integral whole in regards to the afterlife, that is heaven. And then something else we could point out in addition to all of this is the Sadducees, because they held that the human body or the human person just has a this psychological component and a physical component. So psychosomatic, psycho referring to kind of the psychological part, and then somatic referring to the bodily component. And what JP2 is going to advance is instead of kind of what we call a bipartite anthropology, that means two parts. So for the Sadducees, you have two parts. You have the psychological and the bodily. He is going to advance a tripartite anthropology. That is three parts, tri for three, and then partite for the parts. And so you have the body, of course. You have the psyche, the psychological element, and then you have the spiritual element. And so the spiritual element, that is precisely what is properly personal. So that's going to be the realm of deep emotions, the will, our ability to reason, the intellect, all those things are personal center of being that belongs to this spiritual component of man or spiritual principle. And when it comes to our thinkers here, Plato, Aristotle, and St. Thomas, you don't get this kind of tripartite anthropology. It's body, it's soul. It's a two-part anthropology, bipartite. This three-part um, anthropology, you see it in scripture, interestingly enough. It, in the New Testament, you'll find that there are many verses that talk about body and soul, but there are a couple passages where St. Paul talks about body, soul, and spirit. And that is going to be some of JP2's motivation for adopting actually a tripartite anthropology. And I think this is also an influence of the German philosopher Max Scheler, who himself also argued for a tripartite anthropology in his work. And you see, if you read some of Scheler, you'll see this kind of same kind of schema of JP2, where he takes psyche or the psychological element as referring to things that are properly psychological, like um, moods or instincts, drives, things that, in a sense, you could say animals also have. So sense perception, that entire apparatus of sense data collection and processing. But then you have the spiritual part, which is, properly speaking, what makes this type of being a person, that rational element, if you want to think in terms of rational animal, that Aristotelian definition. And when you just have a bipartite anthropology, body and soul, you get this a little bit of a confusion within the term soul. Are you referring to this thing like the psychological elements, or are you referring to the elements are spiritual? You have a little bit of an ambiguity with that. Guillermo, do you have any concluding thoughts for us?
No, this is just a really great slide with these points of reference. And I was just wondering if Shaler's the one who wrote on the Eternal in Man.
Yeah, he did write that book.
Okay. And but that's not necessarily where he refers to this tripartite, is it?
It's just across his works.
Okay. Oh, I see.
Like if you read The Human Place in the Cosmos, that's the very last book he wrote, where he gives his last treatment of human anthropology.
Yeah.
And there he's arguing for it explicitly. And there's a lot of things in there that is well worth meditating upon. But in the end, Shaler does go crazy because he ends up arguing for pantheism in that book, which is a tragedy.
Uh,
Max Shaler's
Interesting.
a interesting figure in that He he died before the rise or before the Nazis really came into power. He died in 1928. So once the Nazis came into power, they suppressed his works because they were very much against the spirit of Nazism. And he converted to Catholicism, then he left after about 10 years. And once he left, he just started slowly going crazy with his philosophy. There's a lot of brilliant things one can learn from him, but you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt given his problems. Um, Another great book on human anthropology is his book called Formalism in Ethics and Non-Formal Ethics of Values. And there's a lot of great insights in that book as well. One thing to note though is Max Schiller is a very dense author. So it's not really something for the untrained, um, those who are untrained in philosophy to just suddenly jump into. Maybe. But for a lot of people, I think it might prove to be very intellectually challenging to read. Um, did you have any other questions, Guillermo?
Nope.
Okay. I guess with that, then we are going to end our video. So thank you for watching. If you've been enjoying our content, please like, subscribe, and share it so that we can continue to spread the message of the theology of the body to ever wider audiences. If you have been enjoying our content, please also consider um, donating us some monetary amount, either through PayPal or becoming a Patreon. You can also tip us cryptocurrency directly on our website or YouTube through the Brave web browser if you use that as well. Your financial support goes towards maintenance of our website and the purchase of materials so that we can continue providing you with great resources such as this video series and our many articles on our website. You can check out all of our articles. They are free for everyone at nouvelesprit.com. We cover a wide variety of topics in theology, philosophy, culture, Catholicism in general. And we also have a podcast that you can find information there. And Guillermo, can you give us more information about that podcast?
Yes, in our other podcast series, we talk about a variety of topics, such as trends in culture and politics, and we address them from a Catholic personalist perspective. You can listen to our episodes on the Nouvel Esprit website itself in the podcast page under media, or you can also use that page, the podcast page, to locate us on Buzzsprout and listen to us there, or use Buzzsprout to locate us in other popular podcasting platforms, such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
All right. If you are confused as to where is all of our social media, you can just simply go to lesnovelesprit.com/subscribe. There on that page, you can join our mailing list. You can find our PayPal, Patreon information. You can find our Buzzsprout, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Facebook, you name it. It's probably there. Again, that is at lesnovelesprit.com/subscribe. Let's see here. Do you have anything else for us, Guillermo?
I would just like to ask our listeners to keep us and our mission in your prayers.
Yes, please continue praying for us. We are grateful for them. And with that, we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone. God bless.